It started with the coffee spill. Not the kind that ruins a shirt, but the kind that ruins a morning. The kind that happens because someone accidentally bumps into you and doesn't bother to say sorry. "Watch where you're going," came the voice of Brian, the senior analyst with a smirk that never quite reached his eyes. His tone wasn't loud, but it cut through the hum of computers and whispered gossip in the glass-walled office. Everyone looked up. Everyone saw the brown coffee spreading across her blouse, and everyone looked away. Janelle stood frozen for a moment, her fingers trembling around her mug, her heart beating so loudly she swore it echoed off the fluorescent lights. She'd been at Harrow and Finch Consulting for 6 months, the only black woman on her floor. And every day felt like a silent exam she couldn't afford to fail. She forced a smile, dabbed at her shirt with a napkin, and muttered, "It's fine." Brian laughed under his breath. "Didn't mean to scare you, sweetheart." The word sweetheart made her jaw clench, but she said nothing. Not here, not now. The office moved on, but she didn't. Her desk, tucked near the copier, became a quiet corner of restraint, the place she swallowed small humiliations like bitter pills. The team had inside jokes she was never part of. Her suggestions were often ignored until someone else repeated them louder. "You're such a good listener," her manager once said, as if silence was a skill. When promotion season arrived, she stayed late, double-checked reports, smiled through meetings that reeked of politics. But when the email went out announcing the new senior analysts, her name wasn't there. Brian's was. That night, she sat in her car in the dark parking garage, her badge still around her neck, staring at the company logo etched into the concrete. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked back at her, tired, steady, and unbroken. The next morning, she came in early. There was a new project on diversity strategy, something HR was excited about, a box to check. Janelle volunteered to lead the data analysis portion. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her access to numbers, reports, the kind that told quiet truths no one wanted to say aloud. Days turned into weeks, and she noticed something unsettling, patterns hidden in spreadsheets and performance reviews. Black employees were rated lower in team fit. Promotion rates were skewed. Even salary bands whispered inequality. The deeper she went, the heavier her chest felt. One afternoon, she closed her laptop slowly, her mind racing. She had evidence. But what could she do with it? That night, she printed the reports, locked them in her bag, and drove home through the rain. Her grandmother's voice played in her head, as it always did when she faced the unbearable. "Baby, they may build the table, but you bring the truth to it." The next morning, Janelle walked into the office with a calm that felt dangerous. The calm unnerved them. Her coworkers noticed it first, the way she stopped shrinking. She didn't join their nervous laughter anymore. She spoke up in meetings, firm but measured, her tone carrying a weight that demanded listening. When Brian cracked a joke about diversity hires, she met his eyes and said quietly, "You ever wonder why you're so comfortable being mediocre?" The silence that followed was electric. Even her manager stammered, "Let's, keep this professional." Professional? The word hung in the air like a warning. She'd heard it before, that coded term that meant don't make white people uncomfortable. But she was done trading her dignity for comfort. That weekend, she stayed up late, crafting a presentation, not for the boardroom, but for the truth. She compiled the discrepancies, the emails, the pattern of promotions and pay. Numbers didn't lie, even when people did. On Monday morning, she scheduled a meeting with HR. The head of human resources, Denise, greeted her with a polished smile that never quite reached her eyes. "What's this about, Janelle?" she asked, closing the glass door behind her. Janelle opened her laptop, connected it to the screen, and began. "This is about the story your data is telling." Slide after slide, she laid it bare. Salary gaps, performance bias, retention disparities. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands trembled under the table. Denise's smile faded with each chart. "These are serious claims. she said carefully. "You're interpreting this data without full context." "With respect," Janelle replied, "context doesn't change numbers." Denise sighed, typed something into her computer, and promised to look into it. Janelle knew what that meant. It meant wait quietly until we decide what to do with you. But that night, she sent the same presentation to a journalist she'd once met at a networking event, a young black woman who wrote about workplace inequality. It was a leap she couldn't take back. Within a week, whispers filled the office. Someone had leaked internal diversity data to the press. The article hit like a thunderclap. Inside Harrow and Finch, the diversity mirage. Screens lit up across the office, employees scrolling with wide eyes. The story was trending. Janelle sat at her desk, her heart thudding. She didn't need to confess. Her silence said enough. By afternoon, she was called into a meeting with the Director of Operations and Legal Counsel. "We're investigating a data breach," they said, their words clipped, cold. She met their gaze and said, "You're investigating the wrong thing." The room was tense. "If you're accusing me," she added, "then let's talk about what I found, on record." They didn't. They asked her to take administrative leave while they assessed the situation. She gathered her things, her mug, her sticky notes, the framed photo of her grandmother, and walked out of the building through a corridor of watching eyes. Some were sympathetic, most were silent. She didn't cry. Not until she reached her car, where the weight of 6 months of restraint finally broke through. Her phone buzzed, a text from the journalist. "They're launching an external review. You did this, Janelle. Hold tight." The next morning, her name wasn't in the office group chat anymore, but it was on the front page. The storm that followed was unlike anything the company had ever faced. Employees began forwarding her story through private group chats, connecting the dots between their own experiences and what the data had revealed. Anonymous testimonials surfaced online. Interns who'd been overlooked, junior analysts who'd quit after months of isolation, a black engineer who wrote, "We weren't imagining it." Within days, Harrow and Finch issued a public statement. They called it an opportunity for growth, promising a full internal audit. But Janelle knew corporate language when she heard it. It wasn't an apology, it was damage control. What they didn't expect was how the world outside the company would respond. Clients started to pull contracts. A state senator requested an inquiry into hiring practices. Suddenly, the truth wasn't just inconvenient, it was expensive. Janelle watched it unfold from her apartment, sitting by her window as emails flooded her inbox. Some were from strangers, thanking her for her courage. Others came from people she once worked beside, apologizing for not speaking up. And then there were the ones that cut deep. "You should be kept your mouth shut. You'll never work in this industry again." She read them all, every word, then closed her laptop and exhaled. Weeks later, she was invited to speak at a diversity and ethics symposium in D.C. The invitation called her a whistleblower, a word that made her wince. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had simply stopped pretending. On the day of the event, she stood backstage in a navy suit, clutching her note cards. Her hands were shaking. When her name was called, she walked out to a quiet room filled with faces, young, old, hopeful, weary. She began softly, her voice almost breaking. "When you're the only one in a room," she said, "you learn to read silence. You learn which smiles are real and which ones are survival, but silence is heavy, and one day it crushes you. So I stopped being quiet." The audience leaned forward as she spoke about fear, truth, and the cost of integrity. When she finished, the applause came slowly at first, then rose into something steady and alive, the sound of recognition. Months passed. Harrow and Finch eventually settled a class action lawsuit filed by former employees. The CEO stepped down. Policies changed. They started new initiatives, hired consultants, built committees. But none of that erased the years of quiet harm that came before. Still, Janelle found peace in knowing she'd forced a reckoning. She took a new job at a smaller firm that valued transparency. Not because it looked good, but because it was right. Her new desk faced a window. Sunlight spilled over her keyboard as she worked, and every morning she whispered a small promise to herself. Never again will I shrink to fit their comfort. One afternoon, she received a handwritten letter in the mail. It was from a former intern at Harrow & Finch. The letter read, "You don't know me, but you changed my life. I stayed because of you." Janelle smiled, tears slipping down her cheek. She pinned the note to her corkboard, next to a photograph of her grandmother. Outside, the city moved as it always had, people hurrying, horns blaring, dreams colliding. But inside that little office, Janelle's world had shifted. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something larger than herself, a legacy of truth, carved from silence. And when people asked her if she ever regretted what she'd done, she'd simply say, no. Because sometimes justice doesn't start with a fight. It starts with a whisper that refuses to die.